Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
The story.
Yeah, he brought out a little glass pipe with some crystals in there, and he said, "Do you want to try some of this?" And it didn't look like, it's not like a needle going into your arm or a pill that you can't control. I thought, it's just a little bit of a smoke, and I'll have a puff and see what it feels like, And that's how it happens. People don't realise, what an entrapment and a lie, this little glass pipe with crystals in there, where it's going to take you, it's going to take you to hell.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. Well, sometimes in life we face temptations and we have no idea where they'll lead. For Andrea Simmons, following one temptation led her down a path where she nearly lost everything. Andrea was a successful businesswoman and devoted mother when she became addicted to ice, otherwise known as crystal methamphetamine. As we will hear, her life became one long downward spiral. How did it all go wrong? And how did her life finally turn around? Well, we'll find out her story today as she has a chat with Eric Scatterbo.
Andrea, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here, Eric.
Glad to have you with us, and let's find out a little bit about your background. What was your life like before being introduced to ice?
Well, I got married pretty young, Eric, at 19, and at the age of 21 I had 2 children, ran a successful building company, made quite a bit of money in the building trade, and, travelled a bit and, had a good life, I think after 21 years of marriage, we had some differences and we separated, and, our kids were grown up and went our separate ways, and there was no God in our life, but we were okay. We worked hard, and we just were looking after the family, so to speak. And I met somebody that I had known in my past, who I'd known now for 13 years. I reconnected with that person, and
you were living on the Gold Coast at this time?
Yes, well, I grew up in Melbourne, in Victoria, and moved to the Gold Coast. It's been 18 years now. So I was living on the Gold Coast at the time of the separation, when I reconnected with somebody that I had known from my past and who introduced me to the drug ice, which I didn't know, Eric, what it was really when I first decided to try it.
So it just started off as a romance. You reconnected with this man who you said you knew for a while. So it wasn't like he was a stranger. You kind of knew him and his background, and so you trusted him? Yeah,
well, I worked with him, and, I was married at the time and never engaged in anything but a friendship. But, I was separated. So I thought, I pursued that, and, I very quickly fell in love with this man, but didn't realize that he was on drugs. And I had worked with him for 13 years, so it's not like it was a total stranger from, that came out of nowhere and just handed me some drugs, know.
Yeah.
And that old quote, you trust me, don't you? It's just going to make you relax. It's not going to hurt you.
So that's what he said to you.
Yeah.
So here you had no idea. You just thought he was a nice guy that you knew through your work.
Yeah.
And he was the one that said, hey, try this drug.
Yeah, well, I went back down to Melbourne to reconnect with him, and he brought out a little glass pipe with some crystals in there, and he said, "Do you want to try some of this?" And I said, "Look, I don't do drugs, I didn't go into that whole party scene as a teenager, I was married young, I had kids, I was more family focused, and so I was like, I don't do drugs, and he said, "Look, you trust me, don't you? It's just going to make you relax and, let your hair down." And I thought, well, I hadn't tried anything before, and I'm 40 years old and I have no little babies to contend to, and, everybody tries something. And it didn't look like, it's not like a needle, Eric, going into your arm or a pill that you can't control. I thought, it's just a little bit of a smoke, and I'll have a puff and see what it feels like,
So, I'm just trying to put myself in your place. In your mind, he was a successful businessman, so
yes,
that would tell you, well, hey, if he can do it and have a successful life, it should be okay. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
That's right. And little to my knowing, he'd had a very successful business life, and, he was doing a $7 million project at the time, and, he was on the stock market, and, the stock market crashed and he lost everything, and somebody said to him, have a bit of a smoke of this and it'll make you, relax about everything you've just lost. He was in turmoil, and somebody gave him an ice pipe.
So he had basically the same thing happen to him that happened to you.
And that's how it happens. People don't realize, what an entrapment and a lie, this little, glass pipe with crystals in there, where it's going to take you, it's going to take you to hell.
So what happens after he introduces you to this and you succumbed to temptation and you took your first puff of ice?
Yeah, I did, and I wanted to try it, and it very quickly, Eric, it took over my life. I started using, every few days, and then I started using very quickly. I started using every day. I had, 3 houses, my Mercedes. I had $21,000 worth of jewelry on my hands.
Wow!
And I sold my $60,000 Mercedes convertible for $20,000 for drugs. 3 houses that I owned, I just sold them for next to nothing, just to keep afloat of the mortgage, because I was using all the money on drugs.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but initially you thought, well, this would just be a little recreational drug on the side, just to have a little fun. But you're saying it became so much more than that. It became your whole world. Absolutely.
It took over my whole being, spirit, soul, and body. It was almost like air. I needed it to survive, Eric. It was, it just took total control of me. I went down very, very quickly, ended up in an empty house, sold everything. I lost connection with my family, with my life and my friends, and I was isolated in a room in Melbourne where I lost contact with reality. I thought the government were after me. I thought I was so extremely paranoid.
Oh, wow.
I was seeing things.
Paranoid delusions.
Yeah, I was seeing things, that weren't there, and it was really scary. It was really scary. And the more I would say, I don't want to do this drug anymore and I want to stop, the downward spiral of depression and delusions and, suicide thoughts and psychosis would kick in even more. So the only thing that could take the edge off that whole downward spiral was to have another pipe and to try and escape it. And you're entrapped.
Wow, so this sounds like a vicious cycle.
It's horrific. It is a hell in itself. You're entrapped in this vicious cycle, downward spiral that you don't know how to get out.
Did your relationship with anybody from your old world continue? Did they know what you were going through?
No, definitely not. We mask it very well. When you're in ice addiction, lies and deception is a huge part of your life. And, I remember thinking that I was ringing my kids on a regular basis, and my daughters would say, "Mum, we heard from you every few months, if that." And to me, because there's no time in Ice World, to me, I was ringing them weekly, and trying to pretend that everything was okay and hang up very, very quickly so they didn't notice that it wasn't okay.
Wow, so even your recollections of relationships were not accurate, that sounds like.
No. Nothing was accurate. My perception, I was living in another realm of existence, and my perception of everything was warped and incorrect.
So you normally are a very outgoing person, but you had become very isolated.
Yeah, that's right, Eric. I mean, I was involved in musical theatre and very social, and with the kids engaged in the children's activities and dance schools, and I became totally isolated. I didn't connect with anybody. People think that taking ice is like a party drug. On the contrary, it really does take you away from anything that's real and this world. And I ended up in an empty house. The walls were all black from smoking this drug, and the windows blocked out because of I thought the government were after me, and they had cameras in the trees, and
Oh, wow.
It was scary to go out during the day, and it looked like everybody was chasing and knew what I was doing, and it was very, very scary. I got lost once around the corner from my house, Eric.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I took my computer because I thought the government were inside my computer, and that I had to take it to the shop to get it fixed and get them out of my computer. So I went up the road and I just started walking, and I ended up, the shop was closed. So I went to the man next door, and it was a milk bar, and I started terrorizing him, saying, "Where's the man next door? He should be here, and is he in with the government? Did he know I was coming?" And I ended up coming out of there and looking to the left and to the right and going, "I don't know how to get home." And I spent the whole day on the curb crying and thinking, I don't know how to get home, and I had lost my phone, and, life becomes so messy. And and then people saying, are you okay? And as I'm sitting on the side of the curb, in tears, and I thought they were part of the government conspiracy that were coming to chase me, and I was scared. And as the dusk started to set, and it started to get cold, and the man from the milk bar closed up, and he suggested, were there any landmarks that I remember? And I did remember an oval where I lived, and the building was orange. And he said, why don't you catch a cab? I think the cab driver will know where that is. And he dropped me off around the corner from my house, from where I was. I was around the corner, and I had no perception of, reality and what was going on. It was really scary.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Andrea Simmons is sharing her story about her addiction to ice, otherwise known as crystal methamphetamine. As we've been hearing, the addiction has taken over her life, and she has sunk into the depths of darkness and despair. Next, we'll hear how she finally reaches her lowest point and how God intervenes in a miraculous way. That and more when we return.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax, and this is The Story. Today, Andrea Simmons is sharing her story with Eric Scatterbo about her addiction to ice, otherwise known as crystal methamphetamine. Before the break, we heard how her life was on a downward spiral. Unfortunately, it gets worse before it finally gets better.
I think the lowest point, there were many low points, Eric. I think the near-death experience that I had was probably the lowest point, where the dealer gave me some, what they call G, which is a clear liquid, and he said it would help enhance, my experience, because I was telling him the deal that he gave me was no good. And I didn't know, but it's horse tranquilizer. And the capacity for me to rationalize and think, what is this? What am I putting in my body? What's going to happen? What am I taking?
Yeah.
I stopped breathing, Eric.
Oh, wow.
I just went out, and I remember opening my eyes and going back into the blackness 3 times. And I remember one day my dad told me if somebody's drowning and they go under 3 times and they don't come back up. So I went out into the blackness for the 3rd time, and I thought, I'm dying here. I can't breathe. And I remember, in my soul crying out, if there is a God out there, forgive me for who I've become and what I've done with my life, and don't leave me here, take my soul. And yeah, it was, I woke up many hours later at the end of a house with the door shut, locked in a room, and I thought I won't do G again. That was a horrific experience. I was feeling unwell, but I picked up another pipe because that's all I knew how to do at this stage. It was like breathing. And it was like another, not long after that, 4 or 5 days or so, that I had the encounter with God. See, when you're on ice, Eric, you take ice for, 4 or 5, sometimes 7, even 10 days at a time without sleeping, without eating,
Wow.
without drinking anything, and you just lose contact with reality, and what happens, your body shuts down at some point and you crash. And I slept for 4 days straight, and when I woke up, nobody was in the house, and I had no cigarettes, and I had no gear, when we refer to ice and drugs being gear, and I couldn't get in touch with anybody, and I had anxiety, and I put my runners on, and I took a walk outside the back of where I lived, because there was an oval at the back. And I don't know what possessed me to take a walk outside in the day. It had to be, I had this drive, and I crossed the oval, and I ended up at an Orthodox church across from the oval, and it was all vandalized, and there was graffiti and the timber locking up the front doors, and, the grass was grown and the fence was broken, and all the concrete leading up to the steps of the church was all broken. And, I remember standing there and looking at this disaster, and I'm thinking, who does this to the house of God? What a disrespect. I mean, I was never religious, Eric. I never went to church. I knew there was somebody that created everything, but, I didn't understand who he was, and that, most of all, that he loved me, and
yeah. But yet you were kind of revolted that the house of God was not being respected.
I was revolted, and Eric, that's what I was doing to the temple of the Holy Spirit, me, the temple of my spirit, that I had destroyed it. My hair was falling out. I was weighing 40 kilos. My kidneys were bleeding. I had broken my front tooth, and my gums were all inflamed, and I had scabs on my legs. I was just, and I had been dragged through the mud,
Yeah. So you're standing in front of that rundown church, abandoned church. What happened next?
So I was standing there, and I looked at this church, and I said, who does that to the house of God? It's what a disrespect. And at that moment, Eric, I looked up at the top of the church, and I saw this cross inside a circle. So that's how I, understood it later as it must be an Orthodox church. And I remember a light came out of the sky, and it was like in a cylinder. It was the whitest light that I have ever seen, and it was like being inside a cloud that was lit up. And it came through the cross and over the top of me. And at that moment, Eric, I was just pushed down by a force onto my knees and then flat on my face. And I'm on the steps of this church, and there's this light over the top of me in a cylinder, and this force holding me down. I was pinned down, and I started crying. I didn't know what was happening to me. And I remember, I'm pinned down with my face to the ground, but I could see on the side, and people were walking, and I'm saying, help me, let me go. And these people weren't even looking at me, Eric. And then I started to think, I must be in an alien encounter. These people can't see me, Otherwise they would surely reach out to help a woman who's on the ground going, help me, let me go. But they weren't even looking at me. So I was convinced I was having an alien experience. And then I thought, I'm delusional and crazy. I've lost my mind, a little bit too much drugs. The only thing is that it wasn't just in my mind, it was physical as well. I was pinned to the ground. And I was just crying, and I was pleading with this force to let me go. And it released me, but only up to my knees. And I sat on my knees in this light and in this amazing peace that came with it. And I am pleading with it, please, what do you want with me? Please let me go. Oh, this is crazy. I'm talking to myself now. And Eric, God spoke to me, and it was as clear as you're speaking to me now. And he said, in the most beautiful, tender, gentle, loving voice, it was a male voice, and he said, get up and go home, my child. And I went, oh no, this is getting from bad to worse. I'm seeing a light, I'm feeling a force, and now I'm hearing audible voice. I've lost the plot here. And I started crying more, and I'm like, please let me go. What do you want with me? And he repeated, get up and go home, my child. And at that moment, Eric, I knew who was talking to me. And I just broke down in a fetal position, and I said, go home to what? I've got no more home. I said, look at me. I can't do this anymore. I said, I've got no more strength. And I went into like a fetal position, and I just sobbed like I've never sobbed before, from the pit of my being. And he said to me, I will give you strength. And at that moment, the light disappeared. I was released, and I stood up, and it was like I was in a trance sensation, and I turned around and I had this peace upon me, and I knew exactly what I had to do. And I kept hearing, book your flights. And I went online and I called the airline, and they said $76, and I hung up, and the voice said to me, check your account. And I had $76 in there. And a series of coincidences took off from there, because the voice said to me, call your friend Charles, and who I had grown up with in Melbourne when I was younger. And I called him, and he happened to be 5 minutes away from my house when he lived like 45 minutes away, and he had his trailer hooked up at the back. And he said, I was wondering why I had my trailer hooked up from the weekend. And I put all my stuff on there, and he took me to another friend's house near the airport. And, I was telling her, God's talking to me. And, my friend said, you've lost your mind. This is not normal. And I thought maybe she was right, but it wasn't until the very next day that I arrived at the airport. And I waved her goodbye, and I'm weighing 40 kilos, and I've got two 30-kilogram suitcases that I'm wheeling, and that was my whole life left. All my houses, all my cars, all my possessions, everything I own. This is what it accumulated to: 2 suitcases, 30 kilograms each, weighing more than me, and I'm carrying them into the airport. And it was like the life, my whole soul, my whole life, my energy, everything in me got sucked out of me, and I collapsed on my suitcases. And my vision, I lost my vision. It went all black. And then all of a sudden I saw it was like a movie show reel, and it was like a long strip, and it was black and white and silver. And it was Jesus carrying the cross. And he was looking at me, and he said, "You're carrying your cross. I'm with you. I'll never leave you or forsake you." And
wow.
This happened to me 3 times, Eric, before I got on the plane. And I had a lady behind me, lift me up and say, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, but I will be." And she said, "Yes, you will, come." And as I wiped my eyes and, apologized for, I was embarrassed. I was on the ground, and then there was no lady there, and I'm thinking I'm going crazy, I'm losing my mind. And this series of coincidences took place, and later learning about scriptures, because I was led into a Christian fellowship where people told me, your experience of collapsing 3 times, carrying your cross. Jesus collapsed 3 times on the way to his crucifixion, and I'm like, what has that got to do with me? I don't know any of this stuff. I'm not religious, but I was, inside me, I had to find out what it had to do with me, because it was the most loving experience that I've ever had in my life. And he helped me, He helped me out.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now, you heard the voice tell you, go home. So I'm assuming you're getting on that plane to go home to the Gold Coast?
Yes, that's right.
And to your mother?
And to my mother and to my family, yes.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time, but what happened next in your life?
So what happened next, I just... I needed to find out what was this force and who was leading and talking to me and I was led into a church, a non-denominational church, that I got to learn about the scriptures, and I kept following the leading of that voice, which now is God. He was just loving on me and helping me not to commit suicide, and putting people around me, because, God works through people, and he was putting people around me where I needed it, and to help me rebuild me, and start again.
So did you go through a formal recovery program?
No, I didn't. People ask me that, and I say, God took me into a church where I engaged in there 4 days a week. I did see a drug and alcohol counsellor on the, people around me that were placed around me recommended. And so I saw a drug and alcohol counsellor, and I was 4 days a week in a church. I did recovery. I had no detox, Eric. I had no side effects of detox. And he just took away all of my cravings and everything at once.
Wow.
And I just...
Yeah, so you reconnected with your mother and with your children?
I did, yes. I reconnected with my mother. They all thought I was crazy because I'm telling them God's talking to me, and, we have to go to this church. But they just loved on me, They just loved on me. And
so they didn't go to church at that point?
Oh, no. They weren't Christians. My whole family now do follow the Lord, and they could see what he's done in my life, How can you not? I want some of that, you know?
So you return to your mother. Over time, you gradually recover from your drug addiction. And fast forwarding to today, you eventually go on to become the founder of the Australian Anti-Ice Campaign. Take us up to the present.
Yes, that's right. The Australian Anti-Ice Campaign, we educate youth and communities about the dangers of ice, and we also help people in addiction create pathways into recovery.
So obviously you can talk from your own experience.
Absolutely. All of our presenters do. So basically people like myself who have recovered can help other people that are in addiction, and also warn people about this drug and what it really does to you and how destructive it is. We also do work in prisons, in child safety, in hospitals, and with frontline workers who work in, with people living in the street and homelessness and so forth. We can give them an understanding of what is going on in the brain and the life of somebody that's entrapped in ice addiction, so that they can better help them,
Yeah, well, what an amazing transformation. I mean, when you were crying in front of that milk bar and then in front of that rundown church, nobody would think there was any hope for this person in the natural.
No.
But amazingly, God reached into your life, well, he spoke to you, literally.
Yeah.
And through a series of events, him leading and guiding you and going back to your mother. Wow, what a transformation. And now you're helping other people.
There is so much more in between, Eric, that, you know, just, you know, we don't have enough time to fill that in. But, you know, I allowed God to lead me. You know, I opened my heart and I was so broken. And thank you to Jesus for allowing me to start again. You know, everybody deserves a second chance.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for allowing me to do that. It's a real blessing, Eric.
Well, what an amazing way that God has worked in the life of Andrea Simmons. Just when it looked like there was no hope for her and she was in the depths of despair as a drug addict, God intervened in a miraculous way and her whole life turned around. As the saying goes, there is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still, and He can pull you out. All we have to do is grab onto His outstretched hand and put our faith and trust in Him. And for Andrea, it did not stop with her merely being set free from addiction, but she's now actively helping others become free and warning others about the trap of ice addiction. As we heard, she's now the founder and CEO of the Australian Anti-Ice Campaign, and they run courses in schools educating people about the dangers of ice. For more information, their website is australianantiicecampaign.org.au. That's australianantiicecampaign.org.au. Well, thanks for joining us for Andrea's inspiring story. I really found it encouraging. I hope you did too. I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.